Hello everybody. Today we're going to be talking about the rise of totalitarian regimes in Italy, the USSR, Germany, and Japan. Here are your goals. Basically all you should get out of this video is a general understanding of the idea of totalitarianism, and you should be able to explain how the totalitarian leaders in the following countries came to power and the goals that they stood for. Let's begin with a general discussion of the idea of totalitarianism. So first of all, totalitarianism can be defined as a form of government in which the state, aka the government, has total and unlimited authority over its citizens. In totalitarian states, governments exert significant control over religious, cultural, and economic affairs of the country. That is, they kind of have control of all the different parts of life in that country. And the governments of totalitarian states are usually single party states. There's only one political party you can vote for or not vote for. And these are headed by dictators who have absolute control, and they can basically just create or destroy laws as they wish. So now we should talk about, why does totalitarianism spread during the years from 1918 to 1939? That is, from the end of the First World War to the beginning of the Second World War. There are two main reasons as far as I see it. One is a lot of nations face disorientation after World War I. The societies are highly damaged, and they struggle to rebuild after this first great struggle. On top of this, the war discredits a lot of old governments, basically because the war didn't really get them anything, or it cost their country a whole lot. And people begin to look for new answers because their old governments seem to have failed them. On top of this, there's widespread economic difficulty. There's economic trouble immediately following the war, and then after 1929, the Great Depression occurs. And basically, after the Great Depression, everybody everywhere is struggling economically. And when people start running out of money, when people get hungry, they look for radical solutions to the problem. And totalitarian governments seem appealing because they offer simple solutions to these complicated economic issues, while democratic governments don't really look like they know what to do. Sometimes these totalitarian solutions are even effective in the short term in fixing countries' economies. So we're going to now look at some specific examples of totalitarian governments coming to power in 4 different nations. We're going to start first with Italy, because this is the first country that really becomes a totalitarian state. And so Italy, after World War I, is pretty dissatisfied. The Italian masses are really upset about World War I for a couple of reasons. One, Italy didn't really get very much territory. They thought that by joining the Allies, they would be able to take over a whole bunch of territory where Austria used to be, but really they don't get very much at the Paris peace conferences. They only get a tiny little chunk, and they're not satisfied with that. They're especially unhappy with that because so many Italians died. And the Italians died for seemingly no reason. All Italy gets is a tiny little chunk of land to the north. On top of that, the Italian economy is in ruins after the war, and the government is having a hard time fixing it because the democratic institutions in Italy are not really functioning very well, and they're having a hard time coming up with real solutions to these economic problems. So people are out of jobs, and there doesn't really seem to be any kind of solution to the problem. So the Italian masses are starting to look for new answers to these big problems that they're facing after World War I. And Benito Mussolini provides them with these new answers. Mussolini founds the Fascist Party, and he promises quick and appealing solutions to these problems. And he starts to gain popularity around 1920. Mussolini frames his political arguments around a couple of key issues. One, Mussolini criticizes democracy and constitutional government, calling them inefficient. And he says that if we could just get rid of this stuff and instead have a charismatic dictator, aka Mussolini, that this guy could fix all the problems immediately instead of having to go through stupid stuff like voting and constitutional checks and balances and stuff. 2, Benito Mussolini idolizes a couple of different things. He idolizes the nation, he idolizes violence in the military, and he also idolizes youthful athleticism. He himself tries to make himself look young and athletic and strong, and so do his followers. And this appeals widely to a lot of Italian people, especially young Italians who are having a hard time finding jobs. So this boosts his popularity. And last of all, Mussolini promises to fix the broken economy by using a powerful government in order to force fair deals between workers and business owners to make sure that everybody can find a job. And so on the basis of these 3 ideas, Mussolini gains a lot of popularity, but not enough to actually get elected as the leader of Italy. So the fascists, which is, by the way, what this group is called, seize power in 1922. In 1922, the fascists have formed a bunch of street gangs, collectively known as the Black Shirts, because they wear black shirts. And in 1922, Mussolini calls on the Black Shirts to march on the Italian capital of Rome. So they gather up and basically start marching on the capital, claiming that they're going to take over the government. The government gives in and just gives over power to Mussolini. Within 2 years, Mussolini is able to centralize all power in his hands by taking over the government, silencing critics, assassinating people who oppose him, and basically setting himself up as the leader of Italy. And so by 1924, Italy is a totalitarian state with an absolute dictator under Mussolini. So moving on, let's look now at Stalin in the Soviet Union. So the Soviet Civil War lasts until 1921 when the Soviets win. After that, Lenin leads the party until his death in 1924. After Lenin's death, a relatively unheard of figure, Stalin, is able to rise up and gain power. He takes power by using his control of the party apparatus, the Communist Party apparatus that was set up under Lenin. He holds a particular important position called General Secretary, where he has control over a lot of party politics. And he's able to use his position to eliminate rivals and to eventually establish himself as the sole ruler of the Soviet Union. This goes against Lenin's idea of where the Soviet Union was supposed to go. Lenin thought that the Soviet Union should become a democracy, and that through a true democracy, the Soviet Union would eventually be able to become a true socialist state. But Stalin had different ideas, and he went ahead and turned Russia into a totalitarian state where he and the Communist Party had total control over society. So Stalin is a controversial figure, and he's controversial because he causes a lot of suffering in Russia, but he also helps the Russian economy to grow very, very quickly. And he does this through his 5-year plans. So in his 5-year plans, Stalin seeks to turn Russia from a backwards farming country into an advanced industrial nation as quickly as possible. And so he does this through 2 main ways. One is this thing called collectivization, where he basically forces all of the Russian farmers onto communal mechanized farming communities. Basically, the farmers give up their own land, they move into these barracks or camps where they farm using advanced technology such as tractors. The idea here is to increase agricultural productivity. That way, Russia can move lots of people into cities because you need food to feed your workers. The second part of the 5-year plan was industrialization, where basically Stalin was just going to force Russia to become industrial by using the government to construct huge industrial centers to produce steel and iron, and to mine more coal and all that stuff. And this works. Stalin is able, within like 9 years, to take the Soviet Union from being backwards and basically unindustrialized to being one of the leading industrial producers in the world, which is good because he's going to need this industrial technology when he ends up at war against Germany. Here are some pictures of from the time of Stalin's 5-year plans. The one on the left shows Russian farmers using a new tractor to plow fields, whereas just a few years before they would have been plowing the fields using horses and other sort of backwards pre-modern technologies. The idea here is to increase agricultural production. On the right, you see a famous city known as Magnitogorsk, which literally means something like the Metal Mountain. And this was Russia's leading industrial center, and it was built in only a couple of years. And it was a huge production center for steel and iron and other industrial things. The main drawback of the 5-year plan is it caused widespread suffering in the countryside, because even though agricultural production was increased, there was not enough food left over for a lot of people in the countryside. So as a result of the 5-year plan, not only did industrial production go up, but millions of people starved to death in the Russian countryside, which is one of the main reasons that Stalin is such a controversial figure. All right, so now let's turn to Germany. So to start with, Germany was super upset in the 1920s and 30s for a couple of reasons. One is Germany was upset about the Treaty of Versailles. The other was because of the Great Depression, which hit Germany especially hard. So the Germans felt a lot of anger at the international community because they felt like they were being unfairly blamed for World War I. There was also widespread frustration with the democratic government that existed in Germany during this time period, because the democratic government seemed incapable of fixing Germany's problems. They seemed like they were too weak and unwilling to challenge the outside world, and they did not know how to fix Germany's economic troubles. And because of this, there were emerging calls for more extreme solutions. People began to lose faith in democracy and to call for radical solutions to the problem. And one radical solution that became more popular with time was the National Socialist Party, aka the Nazis. And so you'll see the word socialist in there. Really, the Nazis don't have anything to do with socialism, as we've talked about it so far. So don't let that confuse you. Really, they're all about the nationalist side of their name. So anyway, the Nationalist Socialist Party was led by Adolf Hitler. Hitler was a charismatic speaker. He was an ex-soldier who had been wounded in the First World War and awarded medals for bravery. And he was also a failed painter and a vegetarian. So Hitler was able to amass a pretty large following using emotional speeches, nationalistic and racist rhetoric, and flashy imagery. And in doing this, he was able to attract lots of supporters, especially among young people and less well-educated people. They flocked to him. Hitler's first attempt to seize power happened in 1923 in the Beer Hall Putsch, where he tried to take over the government of Munich, Germany. And the rebellion began in basically a bar where he tried to rally citizens to overthrow the government. This did not work, and Hitler was put in jail. But he got out of jail, and when the Great Depression hit, his popularity began to skyrocket. And in 1933, Hitler is legally elected Chancellor of Germany. And so once he becomes Chancellor, he convinces the other leading members of the government to grant him, quote, emergency powers, partially because he convinced them that there was an imminent communist threat to the German nation. So these guys give Hitler emergency power, which allows him to eliminate the other branches of the government and makes him the sole ruler of Germany. Minute to talk about Nazi ideas and their goals, like what they wanted to accomplish. There are 4 big ones that kind of go on throughout the Nazi period. One is the idea of the stab in the back. This is something Hitler believed wholeheartedly. He believed that the German army had never been defeated in World War I. Rather, he argued that Germany lost World War I because the army had been stabbed in the back by an anti-German conspiracy that had been led by communists, Jews, and Democrats. So basically, this implied that if Germany ever went to war again, they would be able to win it as long as they eliminated communist Jews and Democrats from German society. His second big idea was that the Aryan race, basically German people, Christian German people, were spiritually, intellectually, and physically better to all other races. Especially, Hitler and the other Nazis argued that Jewish people and Slavic people, like people from Eastern Europe, were inferior and deserved to be removed from society. And what the Nazis argued is that if these other groups could be removed from society, then all the problems facing Germany would go away. The economy would get better, the spiritual problems associated with modernity would disappear, and everything would be perfect. Third, Hitler argued that the Treaty of Versailles should be repealed, and that Germany should be allowed to become a military power once again. And this is probably Hitler's most reasonable point, is that, yeah, the Treaty of Versailles is kind of unfair. And so with this, he has a solid argument for kind of a first step for what the Nazi Party should do. And he actually does go on to push back all of the different terms of the Treaty of Versailles. And last of all, and probably one of the scariest ideas of the Nazis, is the idea of Lebensraum. It translates to living space. And so this idea basically argued that the Germans, because they were the superior race, were allowed to claim more territory. That way they could expand the race. This, of course, would mean moving inferior races off of that territory. And of course, this territory could be taken by military force if necessary. And last of all, we've got Japan. So Japan in the 1930s started moving towards a more nationalist and totalitarian form of government that ended with a totalitarian government being established in 1940. During this time period, Japan focused heavily on advancing its military. There was a widespread agreement that the strength of the Japanese military was more or less the same as the strength of Japan itself. And by 1937, on the eve of the war, almost 30% of Japan's total economy went towards military production and research. China used this military power to expand into China and was able to conquer a large portion of inland China for its empire. On top of this, they began building an empire in the Pacific, conquering lots of the Pacific islands. As they continue to expand, they begin to feel threatened and encircled by the Soviet Union to the north and the United States, which was also claiming Pacific islands, including the Philippines, which was right south of Japan. And so Japan, partially because of these threats, establishes an alliance with Germany and Italy. And their main goal of this alliance is to establish a, quote, new order of things. And they promise to support each other militarily if anybody ends up in a conflict, which is going to happen very soon. All right, so let's sum up now. So basically, in the years between World War I and World War II, Italy, the USSR, Germany, and Japan all turned towards totalitarianism in the 20s and 30s. They reject democratic principles, they focus on nationalism and militarism, except maybe for Stalin, who's not so much into the whole nationalism thing, but is definitely into the militarism thing. And they focus on expanding state power into every aspect of life in order to make the country stronger and ready for the war that is to come.